Hey friends and music makers, very warm welcome and of course, happy Easter. Welcome back and welcome to this week's live stream, part 3 of my series covering music theory fundamentals for electronic music producers. Today we're focusing on harmony, chords, chord progressions, and we're looking for those that evoke emotion without sounding cheesy, transforming our tracks from amateur to pro. I'll break down, as always, everything in easy to understand terms, specifically for Ableton Live users. So feel free to jump in with any questions you have along the way or share your own ideas in the chat. My goal is to help you elevate your production skills and unlock your creative potential. So without further ado, happy Easter again and let's dive in. First up, just a quick one looking in the chat there. Alex Moreno, buenos dias y feliz Pascua. I know that you're up, I would imagine, nice and early in the morning there over in Mexico, if I understood correct. So thanks for joining me straight up in the stream. And yeah, music harmony is the theme for today. So let's do, as always, a quick little test. If you're still there, Alex, if you can let me know if the microphone's all nice and loud and clear. And then we're just going to play a little bit of music as well and just make sure we can also check that the levels are good. So let's do that. We'll have a little bit of limiting going on, but not too much. All right, cool. Well, that's just good to just make sure, as we do in these live streaming situations, that everything's firing on all cylinders. Looks good. Alex Moreno, loud and clear. Great. Thank you very much for letting me know. So that was a little interesting experiment there as well. We've got a house drum kit from last week. We're going to use that again today. Just you can think of it as tech house as well. It's just a nice, simple little drum groove that we're going to use for context along the way. But what we heard there were some chords. And they're not just any chords, actually. They're the chords from arguably one of the probably defining deep house tracks from back in the day by a man called Mr. Fingers. Can You Feel It? Beautiful sort of, like, as I said, deep house track. Great example that we can learn lots of things from. Larry Heard, by the way, is who Mr. Fingers is. He's also released a lot of music under his name, Larry Heard, as well as Mr. Fingers. We're not going to like bring that track up, but I'd suggest if you want to sort of understand some of the very beginnings of house music, it's a great track to take a look at, take a listen to, and understand what's going on. The thing is that what I've done actually is just replayed the chords from in that track. And what we've got here is a classic situation of what those chords would look like in the key and scale that the particular track is, which is A minor. And so here we have like 4-note chords from that scale, just laying them out, as I said, in key and in scale, but they don't sound very smooth or particularly very nice in the example that we just heard. So this is what they sound like again, just to remind ourselves. So why might they not sound good? It's kind of that they jump around a lot here, even though, as I said, there's nothing wrong with the chords. They're in the key and they're in the scale, but they really jump a lot. They're sort of going downwards here, but they're jumping in large sort of distances to reach each chord. So if we kind of show you what can happen when you take those same chords and turn them into something new, this is exactly the same chords, but now in the version that's in the track. So arguably a lot more smoother and nicer, and yeah, they move, the movement of them is great. So we're going to be studying kind of how that's happened there and how we can do that ourselves as we work our way along today. So first up, I was almost going to put this in the chat as a question. So any of you here that are already in the stream, if you'd like to answer it, because so far in this series of music theory for electronic music producers, we've done rhythm, and then we moved on to basses, and now we're into harmony. And again, it all stems from a poll that I put on my YouTube community tab asking, what do you struggle with the most with music theory? And you could choose from rhythm, bass, melody, harmony, right? And harmony, I knew it was going to be a popular one, to be, quite something that a lot of people find a little bit difficult. And so hopefully today we can break that down and understand that a lot better. But the question I would have put in the chat, which I'm going to say, is we started with rhythm and bass, and probably you all know that when you're producing your electronic music, there's no rule book that you have to start with a certain way, right? There are many producers in techno, house, and all of those beautiful genres that do start with the drums. And that's where we began, I guess, with rhythm and drums, because that can lay down the tempo of the track, and it can lay down the energy of the track and give you the groove and the feeling that makes you want to get out of your chair and move around. And then we did the bass, which kind of was another layer that kind of is the next sort of layer in rhythm, and then adding the bass to the rhythm as a way of layering up a foundation of a track. Again, a popular, very popular move, but we can start with the bass, and we can start with harmony, and we can start with melody, and we can start with a vocal, or even FX would be fair. Doesn't really matter. And you'll probably see that the more you do music, the more that you'll make some of those different choices on purpose to switch things up sometimes. It's a really good thing to do, actually. If you always start to with the drums, I can thoroughly recommend don't. One day start with the bass, or start with chords, or start with the melody, and switch that up so you start to develop your skills differently. So, harmony. Why might we start with harmony? That's the question, really. I'll just pop it in the chat. Why might we start a track with harmony? So if anyone wants to have a go at answering that, that would be really interesting to see what you think, or many of you would like to have an answer on that. Because as I said, thinking that we've got drums, we've had the bass before, what could starting with harmony do different to both starting out tracks with, as I said, the rhythm or the bass? So let me know in a second. I'm just going to set myself up here. I've got lots of little tracks here and notes going on. So I'm going to open up a little bit of a MIDI clip. And we're going to break down what is harmony. Again, today, for electronic music and the purposes of the video today, we're going to be looking at chords and chord progressions as the demonstration of harmony. And we're going to put it with basses and all those good things. So let's maybe start with... So Alex Moreno's chipped in there with an answer: to set the emotional tone. Exactly. So I'm going to fist bump my camera there. So that's it. I actually have given it away here on my first track, but it doesn't matter. Alex has given the perfect answer there. So if you start with a harmony as opposed to the bass or the rhythm, and it's chords or a chord progression, for the very first time, I think we can start to really set an emotion in the track. So if you write music that you want people to feel, certain emotions, then writing harmony and chords and chord progressions are going to really go a long way towards getting that emotion out right off the bat. And so actually for myself, I write a lot of tracks with the harmony first, because it then leads me to lots of other decisions later. So I'm not so concerned about the bass or the rhythm up front. I go straight in with some chords, find my harmony, find my emotion. Is it happy, sad, exciting, hopeful, all those good things, and then I start to move on to layering up the other elements. So well done, Alex. That's great. It is emotional context. It sets the scene for some feeling and emotion, which we didn't really get from the bass yet, or from the rhythm in our previous videos. They gave us groove, feeling, energy, dance floor vibes. I mean, you could have a bass line that determines like some emotion, but typically our basses are kind of more a vibey kind of feeling thing than, let's say, giving us a real emotion, as I said. So hopefully that makes sense. Very well done, Alex. As I said, I like to start with a lot of harmonies because it gives me exactly that. So let's start by looking at chord types and chord shapes. So let's just open up an empty MIDI clip here, turn on our pencil tool, and we're going to pop in a note. And at the moment we've got C major showing up here. Well, let's just draw it out across here. And let's say that if you're wanting to sort of understand some of the very basics about emotion and feelings and things like that, it's really good to understand some of the basic chord shapes that we can work with when we're working in music. It's either playing or programming, it doesn't really matter, but understanding the different chord shapes. So if we're in C major and we start with C as the very first chord here, the chord 1, the root chord of C major, what you're going to learn is when you're doing basic triads, so we're going to start with those, they're the building blocks of electronic music and music in general, 3-note chords, triads, okay? You want to sort of start with triads as your chord that you begin with in your journey of sort of learning about chords. So what we're going to do is we're going to do a simple formula here. We could fold everything down to the scale, but I think actually when you do that inside of Ableton Live, what you're doing by doing that is you won't make any mistakes, but you're actually not sort of also seeing what intervals and notes that you're skipping, right? So if we look at it this way and we keep everything in scale, we can't make any mistake here. I'll turn off my pencil, we'll just use Alt Option Drag. And by the way, this is beginner friendly. We're not doing anything advanced here. We'll build up as we go, but this is designed for people who may not know a lot about these things, that you can start from sort of scratch. We can do more advanced ones in the future if you like. I'd be well up for that. All right, so let's say what we're going to do is we're going to play a note, skip a note, play a note. So to build the very first triad, it's just simply doing that. Okay, so anytime you want to build a triad and you have a key in a scale set, you just need to play a note, skip a note, play a note, skip a note, and there we have our chord 1 root chord of the C major scale triad. But the thing is, as I said, if you fold it down to the scale, what you're missing is all the intervals that are happening in between those notes, right? And so if we open it back up, much like we'd be looking at on a real piano, which I've got over here, or keyboards, we can now see that there are distances between these notes. You know, we've skipped a note of the scale, which is right there in the middle, that purple note, and there's one here that we've skipped. So you can see we've done play, skip, play, given that the C major scale is all white notes as well. So it's nice and simple on the piano because you're not playing any of the black keys, you're only playing white notes. But what we can see here is we could do a little bit of counting, and we could sort of see that if we think our home root note C is 0 and we count 1, 2, 3, 4 up, that's a very important interval that determines what is the quality of this particular triad. So again, if someone's here in the stream and they want to have a go, what is the quality of that triad and why? So here, as I said, is the most important part about this whole triad, chord 1, is that very first interval right there. And it sounds like not that, because that's our friend Mr. Fingers, so we're just going to stop that. Okay, Larry Heard, let's pop over to this track now. It's just got a piano on it, and I'd also strongly recommend when you do a lot of these things, just getting a piano actually, because, you know, that's the raw, again, instrument that we do a lot of this work, or a guitar. It just gives you the feedback as to whether this music is actually any good, or whether your chords are any good. So rather than a fancy synth with lots of processing and FX and reverb and all that good stuff, do that later, switch it over later, but try and do your chords and chord progressions and things just with a piano. It's a good little tip, and that way you will eliminate sort of being sold that the music is really good because of, as I said, processing and synth and stuff. You're just going to do it on a raw piano. So our basic triad here, chord 1, I'm just going to stretch it right out. So what do we learn about that interval there? Well, it's a major triad. Okay, so root chord 1 of the C major scale is a major triad, and I know that because of that distance between the root note, the bottom note, the lowest note, and the middle note, which is called the third. It's 4 semitones. So if you learn that straight away, you can go anywhere on the piano and you could choose a note. That could be your home note, and then you would go 4 semitones up. And do remember, this is 0. We're not actually counting that. We're going 1 with the black key above it, 2, 3, and then we arrive at 4. That gives us that interval, and that is a major triad all day long, tomorrow, Christmas, next year, many years to come, right? So what we can learn by learning that exact thing is now we can learn some of the other chord shapes that we can make looking at these three notes. And let's just check something here as well. If we push play and we take out the middle note, you'll probably notice something really quite dramatic, and that is a really good thing to know as well, because very often in my tracks I'll actually do this on purpose. So the minimum thing we have here is a chord, because there are two notes, and that is harmony. So I was thinking about it today in a slightly spiritual sense, like Happy Easter again, everybody. It is Easter, and I was thinking, well, harmony, when we think about harmony in the English language, it's also about us being together and in harmony, living together in harmony with each other. So a nice message for Easter. So if you're wondering what harmony is, well, two people singing together at the same time, or in this case, two notes playing at the same time, that's how we get our harmony. If it was a C up here, and this is another thing that's kind of important to know, if I put that note there on the C, and they're both playing a C, that's not really actually harmony. That's what we call unison, because it's literally just doubling up the very same note, even though we're stacking two of the same. We do have two notes now that we're looking at and listening to. We're not actually creating any form of harmony, so to speak. It's actually what we call unison. And so it's good to remember that if you just double things up and shift them up or below, and they play all exactly the same notes, it's more unison than it is harmony. So let's come back. Let's put our triad together. And what we've got here is a diatonic chord, just the minimum that we need, two notes. Now the first thing we learn is when we take out the third there, what do? We remove all the emotion from this chord. There is no emotion anymore. There is no real quality that it is a major chord. So now that I've put the third back in, we get the emotion and feeling of this chord. It's kind of quite happy and pleasant, right? And so if we take out the fifth, which is the note on the top of the triad, it sounds different. It's again a two-note chord, or if we were to take out the bottom note. So all of those are two-note chords, but the one that gives us the most indication of the triad and the emotion and quality of it is the middle note. So that's a very good thing I think we should learn straight away, is that is where the emotion lies. So because we know that that's a major triad by default, the C1 chord of the C major scale, when we lay it out, skipping the notes, we end up with a major triad. Well, the first thing we can do with it is just pick on that middle note and move the middle note one semitone down. And now we have an interval here of 3 semitones from the bottom notes. Right, so if we duplicate this clip over here, let's do that for context, and let's put that back to where it was. So it's just as easy as that, in a sense, to work between one particular triad and turn it into another triad. So here we have the minor chord, so now we have C minor, and we're going to C major here. So just a simple movement of that middle third note there has turned that chord into a minor chord. So same with looking at it here in the MIDI clip, is playing. You just need to move your finger down one note in the middle there of that 3 fingers that you're going to be using to play your triad, and you've got yourself a minor chord. So let's look at some other chords that we can do from here, right? So this is our minor chord here. Let's even go a little bit further. We'll duplicate ourselves along a little bit more so we can get some more chord types in. We'll just loop this up a bit. Okay, perfect. So let's say, actually, we'll leave the major right over there, and we'll bring this one down to a minor chord. And what we're going to do with our new first chord over here, let's make it another easy, let's say, chord to move from that little shape that we started with, this shape over here, our C major triad. What's another one we can do? And by the way, if you're watching this live stream and you want to jump in, well, tell me what's another one. We've got a minor chord quality here, and we've got the major that we began with. What could be another easy move here with these 3 notes to turn it into another completely different chord quality? Let me know. We're going to, let's just spread this out. I'll wait in case someone wants to give me one. Let's also make this one also minor. We'll leave our major right over here. So a simple move here is to take the top note here and we're going to drop the top note down this time to this position. And now we've got another chord that started from this chord here. So we went from this chord to this chord, and this chord has 3 semitones. 1, 2, 3. Again, this is 0. We don't count this one. And then 1, 2, 3 again. Anyone know what chord that is? Let me know. All right, so we'll just mute this one for a second. So if we put that back to our major, we've now got a morph between this one over here, which is, by the way, called a diminished chord. This is our minor chord, and this is our major chord. So we started here, we've gone to here, and we've gone to here. All just finger movements if you're playing, and as easy as that in the MIDI clip when you're programming and moving them around. So we've got diminished, C minor, C major. Okay, so here's another chord that we can come from here. So just probably started this in a bit of an odd way, but we'll work with it. So let's get, again, our major, because it would be better if this was actually at the start. We go the other way around, but it doesn't really matter. So we've got our major again over here. We're going to turn it into another chord type here. So what we can actually do is, let's say we make it again a minor chord. Okay, so once again, and by the way, I actually, sorry, should have shown you this as well. My bad, because there's an excellent tool that lives over in the Ableton MIDI effects library. And you want to grab this if you're unsure as well, and that is the MIDI monitor, and you want to drag that and put it on a track. And so while you're messing around with this, well, you can actually confirm these kind of things, right? And it's going, you just drag it down and drop it in front of your piano or whatever instrument you've got going on that you're working with. And now what we can do is kind of see everything happen as well. So you can kind of confirm what you're either playing or programming and see what's going on, right? So we can see we've got C minor, C diminished, C minor again, and then C major, right? As we've been working our way along. So let's take this C minor that we just created here, and let's again move one note in a new position. We're going to take the middle note, our third again, and we're going to pop it down one. That creates another chord that we haven't looked at yet. So we're still making chords from that very first triad that we started with, our C major over here, right? Chord 1 of the C major scale. Doesn't really matter. That chord you can take anywhere on the piano, start with a note, count 4 semitones up, 3 semitones above it, and that is a major chord. Similarly, you can do the same with the minor chord, 3 semitones up, 4 semitones. There's your minor chord. Diminished chords, 3 semitones, 3 semitones, and now we've got here a distance of 2, and then we've left the minor or major fifth, in its position, right? So Norman, hello everyone. Hit the like button, it helps spread the video. Thank you, mate, appreciate that. So this very first chord, we're going to see its chord quality pop up here, but it's a C sus2 chord. Right, so all of those are giving different emotion and feeling. You know, the diminished chord here, it's a bit of a dark chord. It's 3 semitones by 3 semitones, but what you're also hopefully seeing is if you're playing this on the piano, you don't have to be too, clever. You can learn how to, as I said, position your fingers here to play the major triad or the minor triad, and then you can see that you actually only just have to move fingers. So if we're playing a minor triad, we only have to move our top finger down one note, and we've got our diminished. If we're again with that minor triad or the major triads, we will, let's say minor is better because it made life a bit easier. So if we had this back as our minor triad, right, all we need to do is drop the middle finger again down one note, and we've got the sus2. All of these different chord qualities give us different feelings, but they're also going to be great for connecting everything together because they allow us to, in a moment when we start building chord progressions, kind of work moving between all of the different chords. So let's say we pick on one last chord configuration from here, so we can stretch this out a bit further. Let's say we'll make it a minor triad again over here. So we've got our final, very first chords here. This is another C minor, 3 semitones from the lowest note up. And what we're going to do this time is we're going to go up. That would be a major, but we're going to go one higher. Okay, and so let's have a listen to that. Now I noticed earlier, let's see what the MIDI monitor says. I reckon it's going to say F sus2, which it does, but actually we could also describe that as a sus4 chord. And so I would be more doing this move potentially myself to make it a sus4. And those sus chords, by the way, I quite like making just progressions out of those, but they're great for moving and connecting all these pieces together. So I hope that kind of helps a little bit. Like we can go augmented and we can carry on building more and more and more chords. That's easy. But let's say we just start by looking at this, because like I said, if you put your fingers on the piano the next time and you make yourself a triad, whether it's the major triad or the minor, you can see that all of these chords we've just looked at, they just come from that. So it's just a case of moving your top finger down one if you want to play a diminished, or your middle finger from major to minor, or up to sus4 or down to sus2. I kind of like that because it's given me all of these different combinations and feelings of chords. And again, if we take out all the middle stuff, this is a mistake, by the way. Oh no, it's not, it's the diminished one. Sorry, I just thought for a second. So no emotion, no real idea of what the quality of those chords are until we bring all those thirds in, the middle note. That's what defines really the feeling. So like I said, the MIDI monitors also can really be your friend. If you just want to jam around on the piano and you want to switch off the MIDI clip and you just want to go to your keyboard and you start playing some chords and then you want to understand what they are. There's a nice chord, right? D minor 7th. We didn't see that a moment ago, but it's giving me down there in the MIDI monitor here exactly what I'm playing. So it's super useful. I love that little tool. We can learn a lot from it. It can tell you what you're doing, what feedback you're getting. So all of those chords, yeah, different qualities. As I said, we're not going to go too much further. There might be one I think I'll add on top. So let's do that, but let's do it in a fresh clip because that's quite busy now that it's got all those chords. So let's start a new MIDI clip. We'll go back to our friend, the C major chord, the root chord of the C major scale, chord 1. And again, play, skip, play is our formula. So we're just skipping a note in the scale. We can see that here. It's the little purple one on the side. And we're going to skip another one at the top here. And there's our C major. And then let's skip another note up here. And that gives us the beautiful 4-note chord, or the 7ths. And that sounds like this. Let's make sure we're in the right, clip up here, which we are. So C major 7th, right? You can see that over there. So that's another chord in our locker that we should really know about, and it's fairly straightforward because it's literally just adding the next interval on top in the scale, right? And again, I could kind of go ahead and start modifying this again with this note down here, by moving it. So now I've got C minor major 7th, right? So learning a lot about what this note here is doing. The third of our chord really opens lots of doors and gets us all these different chord qualities, types, and feelings. So why is that also important? Because a lot of house music and a lot of electronic music, we might not actually be going for a chord progression. We might be going for just a couple of chords. That might be the whole track. It might not be 4 chords or 3 chords or a beautiful long chord progression. It might just be the movement between a couple of chords. Okay, so chord qualities, really important. The third, again, I'll bang on about it a little bit, but this interval in here that defined this chord as a minor and this one as a major, those two very important ones, and the rest are interesting as well. that defines the emotion, that interval there, right? It's really important. Okay, so let's maybe start along with the practice now to kind of start coming up with a bit of a chord progression and see where we go. So let's say that we go into opening up a new MIDI clip, and we're definitely going to make it, you know, a few bars long. And let's say also, maybe because this is a beginner-friendly tutorial, let's make sure that we understand something as well that's going on with our minor and major scales, right? So let's do something here. Let's choose A minor up here in our Ableton's key and scale awareness. So A is our root note, our home bass, and we're in the minor key. Okay, because what we want to look at is when we start building our chords. So let's build the chords that we can make in this particular scale. So chord 1, right? And when you do this a lot, by the way, as well, you should be able to just like that know exactly what chord type that is, right? What is that? So we know it's A, and it's the very first chord of A minor, but that interval there is telling me straight away which chord it is, what type of chord it is. And why am I talking about that? Well, let's see. Because if I do chord 2, so again, I'm just using the same formula. Again, we can fold this up, all right? And you can see I'm playing, skipping, playing, skipping, playing to build the triads, but I like this because, as I said, now I can see what that interval is, right? So play, skip, play, skip, play. That's a pretty different looking chord to the first one, right? Again, here is the same, but something's going on the top there. So again, if you want to answer, someone knows, like again, this is beginner friendly, but if you know how many minor chords do I have in my scale, how many major chords, and there's one other chord as well. That's what we're kind of looking at here for a second. So let's carry on building the chords here. Up to chord 3, which would start on the C up there. We're going to skip a note. We're going to pop in another note up here, and we're going to skip another note, and we're going to play a note. And if you see me make a mistake, do call me out on it, because I'm human and I do sometimes miss something as I go along. So let's say we'll pop in these notes here. We're playing, skip, playing. All right. So once again, as I'm going along, I can see this chord quality straight away, this quality here, this quality, right? And now I can see this one as well. It's telling me what I've got going on in all these chords as I start building them, right? So let's do E. And I quite like using numbers. Sometimes people would address these chords by all the different quality, but you can also think of it as chord 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right, as we go. And we're just going to do 1 octave, and that would give us then 7 chords before we start repeating ourselves again, right? So that's kind of what we're also looking at here. So again, play, skip, play, keeping that formula going. Nice and easy, and we're going to end up with the G before we come back around to the A. So this is our last chord up here. And again, if you pick A minor or C major, white notes only, it's kind of nice and straightforward. Good way to start your learning, let's say, with things like this. So if we turn on scale, we can now see, okay, Heath didn't make an error. All the chords are play, skip, play, right, which is correct for building all of those triads of the scale. And we've taken every note to us in 1 octave, A to A, and we've built the 7 chords. Chord 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then 7, and then we'd start repeating again. Now, what you can see here, and this is the reason why I don't do that, is if I do that, it's great to have all these beautiful tools in Ableton Live, but I don't understand what the quality of these different chords are in the order they are currently. I have no idea. I just know that I've got A, B, C, D, E, F, and G, and all the triads from there. But if I open this out, that tells me a completely different story, right? I can say A minor, B diminished, C major, D minor, E minor, F major, and G major. And that's really, really important, because every single scale I'm going to make of, let's say, keeping it nice and simple, minor and major scales, 7-note scale, so the same here, 7 chords, I'm going to have available 3 minor, 3 major, and 1 diminished. That's a formula we can lock down and remember and that's always going to be the case. And when I learnt that, by the way, it really opened a lot of doors to me, because I just understood straight away, every time I do a chord progression and I'm working with a scale such as this, if it's pentatonic or something more exotic, we might have less chords and some different factors, but we're going to be doing a lot probably of working like this. And so I know that I've got 3 major, 3 minor, and 1 diminished. And how I order those major, minors, and diminished is going to affect kind of how my chord progressions sound, right? So if we copy that clip down and we give ourselves another version of it, if we were looking, for example, at the chords in here that are all minor, then this chord here goes out, this chord goes out, this chord goes out, and so does this one. And that's our 3 minor chords in this particular scale. This is A minor, and we've got A minor as a minor chord, D minor, and E. So if we wanted a sort of sad, more moody, kind of melancholic chord progression, the chord 1, the chord 4, and the chord 5 are those more minor chords. That they are the minor chords of this scale. If we flip that, and if we use chord 2, that's the diminished one. So that's the black sheep of the family. It's in all of our 7-note minor and major scales. And it's the black sheep. It's the only one that's going to have this shape to it and quality to it. And it's in the minor scale, the 2nd chord, number 2. And if we were doing C major here, it would actually be the 7th chord. It'd be the last chord before we turn around. And you can think about that when you look at a piano, you've got those 2 notes right next together in 2 places, 2 white keys, B and C, and E and F. And those are places where little funny sort of things happen. And this is a lot to do with the B being involved, right? B next door to the C. So we're not going to go too crazy on that for now. Happy Easter again, everybody, and welcome to the stream. If you are here with me, do feel free, don't be shy to say hello. Let us know where you tuned in the chat, ask any questions. We're doing harmony here, but first up, we're looking at, it's beginner friendly. We're looking at chords and trying to break down this, and in a moment you'll see how all this makes sense, right? So if we were using the 3 minor chords and that diminish, we'd get a bit of a moody kind of chord progression. And if we sort of did the reverse and we said, okay, we'll have all the major chords and we'll take out all the minor chords, then we'd have those 3. We'd have C major, F major, and G major. So maybe we're going for a bit more of a happy, kind of nice feeling kind of chord progression. So once again, I just sort of wanted to show you that, because if you can remember things like this, just like all the chord qualities we looked at, that you're just moving one finger around to make, the middle note of a triad become major or minor, the top note down to make diminished, the middle note down to make sus2 or up to make 4. Great, you've suddenly got all this material to work with, which is going to make your chord progressions and music sound a lot more interesting before you have to go really super crazy about all sorts of really technical musical theory. Same here. Every time you know that you've got 7 chords and you're going to make a chord progression, and you've got 3 major, 3 minor, and 1 diminished, it's going to help you understand how you can make that emotion happen within that chord progression, right? So thinking about that, let's say then that we start sort of making a bit of a chord progression, and let's stick with A minor, and let's say that we go for, I could just cheat, I might as well just, as we've just shown it, let's just copy that down. It's not cheating, we just laid it out. So let's say that we've got this, and let's say that sometimes it can be nice to actually do this. Let's make it 4 bars, not up there, that was my mistake, down here. So let's make it longer, and then what we can do is kind of copy all these over. We could also actually, let's just do that. We'll just get it like that, we'll duplicate it across, and then what we're going to do over here in this first bar is take all of these away, right? And we're just going to have over in the second bar over here, just our template, let's say, of sorts, so we can bring all of those back in, and we could loop everything a bit smaller. Got 4 bars over here, and they're all our chords we've got to play with, right? So let's say that we would like an A minor chord 1 in our track, and maybe we start our chord progression with that. That's a nice way to perhaps kick off the bat with our root chord, our chord number 1. It tells us that that's our home of our scale. And then let's say we're going for a bit of a moody feeling. So we'd like another minor chord in here. Let's say we're making some sort of techno or something that we want like a little bit edgy. So let's say, it doesn't have to be techno, by the way, it could be melodic house, could be house, but let's say we'd like to go to another minor chord. So let's have the D, that is a D minor. Again, you should be able to tell me why I'm saying that's a D minor. And if you missed the first part of the stream today, we broke that down. That interval there tells me that is D minor. Also E, let's bring that over. Okay, so we're going minor, 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 minor. So maybe what we'll do is we'll have a little bit of a mood change somewhere towards the end here. Let's try that. So we might bring in our friend C major over there. So we're going minor, minor, major, minor. Okay, and that's sort of what we're working with our toolbox over here of all these beautiful triads that we're looking at. So right now, it's not the sexiest chord progression ever you're going to see, but it currently does the emotion of minor, minor, major, minor. So let's have a listen to how that sounds. So we've got lots of different possibilities, right? Imagine if we take out the C major there. I like it, but we go over and say, well, let's try B diminished there, you know? So we go for another kind of like really tense kind of chord here. And it sounds really tense, right? It's not, I probably wouldn't be saying that was the right answer at this point in time. And in a moment, we're going to think about as well, because before I was just kind of randomly choosing a little bit my mood, right, and emotion between the different triads. Well, if we think a little bit further ahead, we're going to get there in a little bit about tension and release. Whatever I kind of end up with here, or whatever I start with, that could make a real difference, right? Because what happens here does loop back around to here. And sometimes if it didn't loop back around, this could leave us hanging, or it could end up going back to home and feeling what we call in music resolved, where it feels naturally that it returned back to home base instead of sort of leaving us hanging. If you want to leave your listeners hanging, or your audience or your dancers, you can do that, right? That's using tension and release with this major minor diminished combination. We can make decisions about that. So let's say that we've got A minor, D minor, C major, and E minor going on. We could also think of these in numbers, which I think is really helpful. So we've got chord 1, we've got chord 4 here, we've got chord 3, and then we've got chord, would it be 5 up there? So it's the 5th, right? So that's how I'm kind of understanding that. I built from the scale going up, chord 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. That kind of helps me as well, because I understand that this chord progression is a 1, 4, 3, 5 in its current shape. Okay, so how might we go about now kind of turning this into something a little bit more interesting, as in the movement of the chords, right? So I'm happy I've got major and minors and all that good stuff, but now what we want to talk about a little bit is when we're building a chord progression, something called voicings. Okay, and if we look at this chord, if we're beginning to do chords, you know, at the beginning of our career, and we're not really, you know, we're brand new to all of this, we might leave this exactly as it is, but it's jumping around all over the place. It doesn't matter what drums we put with this. So let's take that very same chord progression and copy it down to here, and now let's work on it. So we've got an A and B shootout in a moment. So the first thing, if we want to think about voicing, and by the way, I'm not really doing harmonic The rhythm of harmony today, that is going to come in another future episode as the last one of the series, because it's a bit more technical. Today we're going vertically rather than horizontally. We're more paying attention to what's going on with this emotion and feeling harmony-wise as we're going up here vertically. So voicings. If we start looking at these chords, as I said, they jump around a bit all over the place. There is a bit of a up, and then there's a bit of a down, and then back up again. So I would start by looking at how can I sort of connect all these chords so they are more, you know, together with each other. So what I would probably do first up is I would use what is called inversions. Again, this is a beginner-friendly tutorial, by the way. If you want more advanced stuff, come back to the channel. There'll be plenty of that in the future. But inversions, what are they? They're kind of where we take the notes that are in our chord that we have available to us, and we just flip around the different positions that the notes are in the chord. So they're still the same chord, but we turn it into an inversion. And I would say, by the way, as well, if you lean on plugins like Scalar, you might say, hey Heath, why are you doing all this? I can use Scalar and I can grab AI chords and all that kind of thing. You can, but then a lot of those can trap you as well, because if you don't know how to polish them, refine them, turn them into something pretty, or what the rules are or tolerances to what you've got, it can really end up causing you a lot of problems. I think learning stuff like this can really open a lot of doors for you, and you'll feel really comfortable. As I said, I think understanding chords and harmony for me was a game changer, really, to be able to write the music that I wanted to write. So I think it's very, very important personally. So this chord here, let's leave our chord 1 exactly where it is, and let's say chord 2, we could invert the top note here, second inversion, and bring it to the bottom of that chord, and that does two things really nicely. So it's inverted this chord here. It's still a D minor, but it's now got the A on the bottom, and what it's done there is it's put those two A's right together. So these top and middle notes are not together, but we've now got what is called a common tone. And that is a really goal that we're looking for here when we revoice chords, is to have a common tone. Doesn't matter if it's in the middle or on the top that the tone is common. So if these were like that and that was our common tone, that would be fine, but you want them to be in the same position of the chord. So we've now tied chord 1 and 2 together into sharing a common tone. Okay, that's really, really good. Let's look across at chord 3 and have a look. Is there any common notes in there to this chord here that we could do an inversion to and revoice it and create a common tone? I don't see any common notes. I see A, D, and F, and I see here G, E, and C. So this one we're going to come back to in a second. We could again reshape it by inverting it. We can still do that, and we can also move the middle note. Right, moving the lower note wouldn't really make sense. That's just spreading the triad out. But if you're revoicing it, you're inverting it, you're going to be typically moving, you know, your top note or your middle note of the triad, or both sometimes, right? So you can actually take both and bring them down there. But I don't see there's too much to gain from that in this case. Maybe the G here, we'll have a listen in a moment, that could work. But if we look across here to our next combination, we actually have a common tone in a couple of places here. So this looks good for me for an inversion to make these two work together well. So let's take the B, let's drop that down. That's nice. That means we've got common tone here, common tone here. But here's another caveat for you, and watch out for this one. There's a hidden chord progression here if you're doing loop-based music. So if we didn't have any of this stuff over here, our map to the chords available, right? If we don't have that and we turn off the loop, or let's say it just runs across to here, and we push play. Hang on, sorry, wrong one, just click. Let's color it really different. Right, this becomes the last chord here. This chord that we've just inverted, which was E minor, right? So if I put that note back up there just to check, it was E minor and it was chord 5, right? And so like I was speaking about before, a little bit about tension and release, if I actually do what I've just done there, and that is the final chord, it kind of leaves me hanging a bit. It doesn't really feel like it kind of like went back somewhere where I started, which was over here in the root chord of this particular key and scale that we're in of A minor. It didn't resolve. It left me hanging on the 5 chord, which the 5 chord, if any chord wants to pull back here, it's our friend the 5. More on that in the future, but that 5 chord that I've used up there loves coming back to home base. So there's a hidden chord progression here which many people overlook when you're revoicing and doing what I'm doing, and that is, how does this turn back around to here, right? So we've got some good stuff going on, but we've also got another chord to contend with over here where this is going to loop back around, and it shares an E, which is great, right? So what I'm thinking to do there is maybe I flip the G's down, and now we've got an E going straight to an E here, right? Whereas if I undo that, you could see it's nice here, but the E is not a common tone. It's a common note, but it's in a different position. So if you're not following this, do let me know. But the G's are common between these two chords, but the E in this chord is in the middle, and it's the top here. Okay, so I hope you're following that. So the reason I would bring the G's down there is to make that line up with that chord, right? So we've still got a bit of a mismatch here. There is no common tones, but now we've smoothed this out quite a bit. Nice. And we've also got, if you sort of look in here, there's a few things going on. We've also got this lovely stepping down through the middle here. It's kind of like, you know, all going down in a common direction. Okay, on the top, we've got a bit of a different movement to that, but there's kind of that going on. There's the stepwise motion going down. And it's pretty much, it's not quite the third, because the third is again in the middle, but the middle is stepping down here. So if we wanted to adjust that, we could actually perhaps, let me show you that. So we could actually copy this clip down again. So we're making different versions of it. And in this one, we could actually access another note in the scale here to potentially kind of try to do that, or we could actually go back and sort of say that we build a top note up there and we have this stepwise motion going down in the thirds. But that's getting, you know, pretty technical. We don't have to do that, but it would be another option to take this chord progression somewhere else, bit more slightly advanced. So let's look at the ones where we've got no common tones whatsoever, and that's our, like, what was before the inversions, the major and minor that were happening there, C minor and D minor, C majors and D minor that are going on in here, right? And so what we can do there is, again, sort of build a bit of a new chord. And what I generally sometimes do, let's look at what the grid size is. It's currently 16th notes, which is okay. We could also do 8th notes if we want. Let's just stretch it out a little bit so we're sort of full screen here, more or less. Okay, and let's change our grid in the back to reveal 8th notes, and we can try either or. So what I'd often do now is I'll stretch one of these notes across into this area, like an 8th note here, and if that was the middle note of this chord, then I'm going to try and make that the middle note of that chord. So I'm going to make a whole brand new little chord that kind of can connect those two together. So if you're seeing that, here's our original chord, and now we're making a little chord that puts this section, the note in the middle, which lines up with the middle there. So we've got a common tone right there. And if you want as well, we can split that or cut it, right? And we can go in there and make sure that's tightly cut if you wish. Make sure it's snapping in there. And now we've just sort of cut that little chord in there. So let's have a listen to what that sounds like. Nice. So we've now made a whole brand new chord within the chords that didn't exist a moment ago. And so we've revoiced it, we've smoothed it all out, and we've got common notes between chords. So chord 1 and 2 work, they have a common bottom note. Now we've got chord 2 and 3 connecting here with a little common chord. And again, if you want, we could carry, hang on, let's undo that. If we want, we could even, just to show you, pull that back and you could bring that up into there. And similarly, you know, you could bring that right down there and make it a whole new little chord that re-triggers there if you wish, or you can have the long notes stretching over. Just depends a little bit the sound you're going for, but neither of them are right or wrong, but now it just perhaps makes it a little bit visually easier to see what's going on. So we've got a whole brand new little chord that's tucked in there. That means that the common notes are shared in the middle. Now, if that didn't work, what I just did, or I didn't like the sound of the middle tones matching up, I could also try the top notes or the bottom notes, right? So I could also drag the G across. That would have meant the common tone would have been the lower note, and then I would not have my F up here, you know, etc., etc. So I went for the C as the common note, but I could have used any of the three notes of the chord. But the middle note's good because, again, it's our emotional connection in the middle there. So, you know, I kind of, for my ears, quite like the longer notes with just the split in the middle. Just sounds a little bit different. Just gives it a bit more melody. So you can split it if you like completely, but I like it like this. And we're tapping into something that's really good here for me. And I hope you're enjoying and learning and you're finding this interesting and valuable, because good chord progressions have melodies. You think, what? Melodies are separate kettle of fish. Well, it kind of is, but by having these original two chords that didn't have common tones, and we've made this little connection between them, we're starting to get little melodies inside of our chord progression. We've got little, what we call motives, right? And we can actually sort of work and build on that further and make even more kind of like, you know, melodies out of this. Perhaps we pull this back, for example, and we have here another little note that connects that chord over into here for a second with a common tone, and then we drop down into this chord. Let's hear what that sounds like. Oh, hang on, we lost the note. We lost the note on our final chord over there. We need to get that back. Right, and so you're sort of digging in here and kind of getting little nuggets and little motives that you could end up reusing in the track. So if we started like sort of, if I give you an example of that, and we take out just for a second a few things here, you know, we've got this kind of little melody motive that's lurking inside our chords. And so we might reuse that theme in our track, and so chords with melodies within them are a good idea. So for me personally, that chord progression now, if we go back and look at where we began, which was the selection of, so let's just get back to the right clip. Should really be numbering them, tried the different colors, but let's do this. 1, 2, and 3, just so it's a bit clearer. So we started here in 1, where we picked our chords from what we had. This is our pool of A minor and all the 7 chords, the 3 major, 3 minor, and 1 diminished. I'm going to keep saying that because that's the facts. And then we did minor, minor, major, minor, which is 1, 3, 1, 4, 3, and then 5. And now we've taken that selection and then we inverted it into this shape, which smoothed everything out. We got common tones where we wanted to have them, but we were still missing, and we had the last chord having a chord progression here. As I said, that's the hidden chord progression many people forget. When it loops back around, does this share common notes here? Yes. Then we had this little problem here that these 2 chords don't have any common tones, but it's a good problem to have. I like that problem because that means I come up with that. All right, so 1, how we began. 2, revoiced. Not bad. And then 3, revoiced with new common tones. So that's an A minor chord progression from scratch with an interesting side to it. We can continue to develop it if we wish, sort of like I was just showing you. We could find other little possibilities where we could create little melodies. We could also turn these into 4 chords if we wanted, so we could go and step up and take, you know, skip playing the next notes and say, okay, I really wish that this was actually a 4 chord progression rather than being just the triads, right? So we could say, okay, what does that sound like? Some more thicker, richer sounds. So that could be an option, right? That would be a 4 chord kind of option. Let's take 3, copy it down again. Let's say this time we do something a little bit different. We go for what's called a pedal tone, which could be, so I'm going to spice this up a little bit more. So let's say we'll keep our 4 chords right down the bottom there. Normally I would do that to start with, but again, it doesn't, you can add them later. You do need to check and still make sure you're keeping your common tones working. Everything works the way you want it to work, obviously, if you're adding extra notes to it. But let's say we're not so much adding extra notes, but we're still developing what we have. So little clip number 4, we're still trying to spice it up a little further. So we've got revoiced, common notes, everything's nice. We're going to look at pedal tones, and we're going to look at something else we can do here. So when you start to get these little melodies pop up, where we've kind of broken up chords to get that, anywhere where we've got chords that do share the common notes, well, we can stitch those together. So I'm going to use Command J, and I'm going to stitch that into a long note. Same here, and the same over here, because all of those are common tones. So now they are long flowing notes. That's going to mean that it's actually a little harder for you to hear where the chords change. It's a deliberate way to sort of hide a little bit that side of things. So a little bit thin though with the triad, probably better with the 4 chords. So we might kind of keep the split. I think here and here made sense to be split, and here and here. But I think because up here we had 2 of those, I think one of those can kind of remain. So let's say it's the top note. It doesn't really matter which one I join together. It's up to you, but I mean, that is one way to hide that. I think it would sound also a lot better in the context of all the other parts of the song. So I would revisit that. I'm actually putting it back to how I had it, which is re-triggering all the chords where I had it, but the joining of the notes is well and truly in the game. It does hide the change between the chords, but like I said, if you're losing the sort of texture at the moment that you're looking for, the thickness or the re-triggering of the chords, then you don't want to do that. I also mentioned before, when I changed this to 8th notes, there's a bit of harmonic rhythm happening here. This changes, the chords are changing in 8th notes here. They could be 16ths. So we could go into our grid and make it smaller, and this could be a smaller chord here. It could be just a 16th that happens there, like that, and the same here. And so you could find that that would be a bit more spicier than the 8th notes, perhaps. Right, it's faster, it's a different rhythm, so that might be something you're going for. Maybe you want to slow it down and turn it into a quarter note. So like I said, there's lots of little things you can do to further refine it. And if you start with the piano like me, the cool thing about that is, like I said, it's given us our raw kind of feedback. One last thing, so let's do the pedal tones. So pedal tone, sometimes we can achieve this with the bass, but we could also do it here by taking like our root note and having a note that also plays the root note. We're in A minor, so we could have A1, or we could go above the chords, which would probably make more sense here, and have A3. That sort of gives us a note that kind of glues all these chords again together, all sharing like one note. And again, that could be split up. So it doesn't have to be all one note. It could be following the progression. And it makes sense to be up there in this particular chord progression because A2 we're working with and A1's a bit low. But that would be one way to also incorporate, as I said, like another element that can also glue your chord progression together with a common tone right across all chords. And again, what we could do here is maybe split that up a bit. So let's change our grid again in the back to say 8th notes. And now we could take this, join it back up, and then split it. It obviously stands out a lot like that, but again, in context with everything else, or perhaps, as I said, you just split it like I had with each chord change, but you could definitely do some interesting things with it. You could make it quarter notes, or let's say half notes that we split it, just so it's got a different rhythm to it. And it could have rhythms within rhythms. So don't want to go too far with that, but that is another option that you've got. It's called a pedal tone. It's where you take, traditionally it's a root note. We're in A minor, it is the root note, and you add that as a constant tone to the rest of your progression that you've built. Okay, so that was, I think, our chord progression up to now. Let's kind of finally, I kind of like it like that. Let's kind of finally just give it a little bit more sexiness. Let's give it some randomization of velocity. We didn't play it in, we've programmed it, so it needs to kind of have some vibe there. And let's get something like a drift. So let's maybe have a pad sounds here. And just looking at the chat for a second, Alex Moreno, is it okay to use just 1 to 2 bars of a progression in the intro, the full 4 in the chorus, and an 8-bar variation in the break, or is variation just about creativity? That's a really good question. No rule books, as always. I think we're going to look at them in a moment at some other alternatives to this, because this is like, I guess what I've done from scratch is a 4-chord progression. You don't have to have 4 chords. So similarly to what we looked at a little bit earlier with the chord types, you could, so when we went back and we started building the, the different chord shapes that we have, sorry, that's the scale information, where we're looking at this clip here. Similarly, when you're doing a chord, so basically we don't really have a chord if we don't have 2 notes minimum or 3, right? So these were all triads. I'll get to my point in a second. So if we were to just have this note and this note, we've got a chord, but it's the minimum we can have for a chord. And for a chord progression, the minimum would be 2 chords, right? To go from one chord to another, there's a progression. So there's no rule book. There are 3 chord progressions, 4 chords, 1 chord that plays a lot through a whole track, 2 chords. So I think if you think about that, that's the first thing. It doesn't have to be 4 chords. There's no rule about that. Just losing my microphone there. Hopefully that stays where it is. So is it okay just to use 1 to 2 bars of progression in the intro? Yeah, so some of the things like, let's say we're in the intro of the track, and we've built this as our starting point. Okay, so we've got our nice chord progression in our key and scale, and we copy it down here, and we want some sort of variations of that. One of the first things I would probably do in an intro of the song as an option here is I'd actually take out the thirds, and I'd have a very deliberately kind of muted chord progression at the very start of my track. So if we give that a new color, So that's one tactic you can do, knowing that I can build on those 4 chords by adding the thirds in. And also, if you think about that as well, not only can you go this direction, so we would go that clip to this clip, you can then actually go to this clip, right? Which is our 4-note version of that. Nice. So we've got all the possibility there of extending ourselves as we go through our track, from very muted, neutral kind of chords to our full progression, and then to 5. So this is just showing you more harmony, but to answer the rest of your question, there's no reason that you couldn't also, as another alternative strategy, perhaps just use 2 of these chords. So you would be maybe working without this chord, and you'd be working with those 2 chords. And then later you turn it into a 4-chord progression, but you use only 2 of the chords, if that makes sense. So the creativity definitely comes into play. I think I could think of quite a lot of ways that you could go about that. So is it okay just to use 1 to 2 bars of the progression in the intro? Absolutely. The full 4 in the chorus and the 8-bar variation in the break. Everything you said would be possible. So hopefully just looking at a couple of these things that I've just talked about there gives you a bit of a clue that creativity definitely comes into it. There is no rules to that. So think about sort of building the chords up in harmony. Think about maybe not revealing all of them straight away, and then later you reveal all 4 of them, changing the harmony of them, taking away the third so there's no kind of emotion to them, so they're very neutral. All those are great tactics for building like variations to these, the same as chopping all this up and changing the rhythm as well. So I'm thinking, my creativity is starting to work a bit now. So if I go 4, copy that down as well, and I go into that, and here's my main chord progression. Well, if I make that a different rhythm as we go along as well, so we go again and change our grid in the background, and we go right down into 16ths or 8ths, and we chop that up, we're going to get that proper like progressive kind of, maybe again not 16ths, and maybe you would also do like some alternative rhythms in here as well, not just all 16ths. Just going to go backwards a bit. So let's change it to 8ths or quarters. Let's try 8ths. You know, that could work really nicely. And what I was going to do just before I stopped, just for a second to answer that question, I hope I'm helping, was I was looking for different sounds here. So let's say finally we're going to switch the piano out here, and we're going to give ourselves a bit more of a sexy synthesizer to listen back to what we've got. Because like I said, just work with the piano to get yourself started and get the real music going in your track before going for all the bells, whistles, synthesizer. So if we now play back a few of these variations. Really nice emotion in there right now. You start to feel it with a proper synth. And let's say even this was a Ableton Drift preset here, by the way, Monday morning as it's called. Let me just check what happens with the filter cutoff. Well, let's say we're just going for a quick sound by ourselves from scratch. Just a fast one, just really nothing more than a bit of wavetable here. Now the fun stuff starts to happen, right? We know our chords are good. right? So even if we take off the modulation, we're now starting to hear the chord progression with our own synth touch to it. But we nailed that chord progression and all the voicing and everything first with the piano and understood that it sounded really nice. And so here again, here is the stripped down chords with their thirds removed, the middle note of the triads. So no emotion, great for breaks or starting the track where you want to strip away a bit of feeling because later you're going to come with the full chord progression. So if we came at it with the full chords, there they are, our full triads. If we then came at the triads, cut into eighth notes for the rhythm, which we could make plucky as well on our envelope. So this could be the same chord progression tweaked to bring that kind of rhythm deeper into the track. And then we've got four note chords here if we want as well. Add more harmony, but then we need our envelope again back. Okay, so Alex, yes, thank you. Really appreciate the way you break down the basics and tie everything together. You're very welcome. I'm glad that it's translating well, because sometimes, you know, these things can run away and get a little bit, a little bit down the rabbit hole, as we say, using the expression. So hopefully that's a good example there of, like, you know, making a chord progression from scratch and tying in the really important things about it, such as voicings, which we dealt with there. We looked at the inversions to get those voicings right. Extensions we haven't done. That's something we can look at in a second. We did with the seventh. So basically the seventh chords in the white clip here. No, sorry, the purple one, clip 5. This one is a form of an extension where we've taken the triads and we've turned them into sevenths by adding the fourth chord, the fourth note in the scale on the top of them. Well, similarly to that, you can also add then, look, if we just look at chord 1 here, so we've got the basic triad and we've added the top note to it, skipping and playing the same formula. So if we skip and play again, we're up here now. So we'd be right up there. Let's mute that note. Okay, so now we've got the triad with what's called the ninth on top of it. So thinking that our root note's the 1 and the next octave, the root note would be 8 if we were just counting up again, all the notes of the scale, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, we'd arrive there. So now we've added the 9th, then you can add the 10th, 11th, and 13th. They're all common additional notes that you can add, extensions of the chord. So we extended it originally with the 7th, adding that interval, but you can also add the 9th, the 11th, and the 13th. They're all very popular extensions, and sometimes those extensions are the answer again to getting your voicings to work. So you can feel free to use extensions to also work in that area. So let's have a listen to, let's make another version of this with extensions. So let's bring this down. Run out of colors. Let's give it this color. And this time we're going to take our sevenths and we're going to go up, as I said, to the ninths. So let's just come up to the B in that case. Okay, so again, if you want to leave the seventh there for context, you can. So let's maybe leave it in its position for context. And again, if you want to do this, you can do that now that we've unpacked a lot of the other things we did earlier. So I'm going to mute that note, but I'm going to drag it up and give myself the 9th, as I said. So that would be a 9th there. And then I can do the same here. Same here. And the same here. So I'm just building on top of my triads and I'm taking away the fourths. And instead of having sevenths the chords with the fourth on the top, the fourth note on the top, which turns them into sevenths. We've now got ninths here. Well, we haven't here because I muted it. So they're all extensions. So what does that sound like of this particular clip down here? Quite nice again. So we've got this big kind of rich, kind of interesting chord. If we go back to the sevenths. So yeah, chord extensions are also a nice thing to tie into adding extensions. As I said, are some of the most common ones, and you'll see it in music theory. You might read add 9 or C major 7. That's what it's talking about, right? And if we look again at our MIDI monitor down here, while things are playing, this little bad boy over here, let's do the sevenths. Now, it's a little confusing what it's giving me back today, only because of the inversions I did earlier. So if I'd sort of done those extensions with everything in the root position, there's a little caveat that's going on with the MIDI monitor. Because I've smoothed out this and revoiced it, the chords are no longer in their root position. So if we sort of redid that from the very beginning, I hope this makes sense. If I go back to that decision kind of there, and we make those sevenths or ninths, then you're going to see on the MIDI monitor all of the sevenths and all of the ninths kind of thing, rather than, because they're in inversions and things, it can get a little bit kind of, you know, skewed a little bit in terms of what it is giving us the feedback. But I still do like the device a lot. But you can see now we're pulling up the sevenths in when the chords are kind of in their root position, as opposed to, as I said, when they're starting to be inverted and turned into new chords. All right, so moving on. Chord progression from scratch. Hopefully that was really interesting to see it evolve. As I said, all those things, the voicings, common tones, inversions, it changed my total ability to, you know, put you know, chord progressions into my music that gave the emotion that I wanted, but also sounded smooth and interesting and buttery and nice. And as I said, we also got these little melodies that are going on inside the chords from making the chords work together. That's all magic, which could be missing completely if you just, as I said, potentially use scalar and AI and some of these other things that can throw out chord progressions all day long and chords, but how we can evolve them isn't perhaps quite so obvious. Pedal tone we looked at as well. The hidden progression is the last chord going around to the first. Watch out for that one when you're looping around. Joining notes in the same pitch, we've covered all of that. Tension release we looked at a little bit. We chose some minor, some major. We were speaking a bit about that, and also we spoke about that last chord and the relationship with the first chord. If you don't have a first chord, or after the last chord things carry on and stop playing, there might be a feeling of tension left behind there if you leave us hanging, and that can be on purpose, and it can be also maybe that you didn't mean for that to happen. All right, so let's maybe throw in a bit of a bass with what we've got so far. So let's pick our favorite clip. I think it was 4. Let's get on track here. This one, just so I know what I'm playing back. That was the chopped version of that. And yeah, I sort of thought I heard something a little bit odd there. It's that little note right there. We don't need that. I heard that earlier, actually. Wondered what that was. That's what it is, a little tail of a note that kind of got left over. Okay, and our sevenths and kind of ninth inversions over there. All right, so let's say that we hit ourselves with this. Just a basic bass line. And let's bring our chords up a little bit as well, just so they're a little higher in octave. Alternatively, our bass lower, try that way round. Or look at the bass instrument itself, see if we can make it a little brighter. Let's work through, like, so now we've got just a simple bass line at the bottom here, which is moving along on the E. So we're in A minor, so what we might do already is put that on the root note, this bass line that we're just introducing here, so we can kind of listen to what that sounds like working with those chords. So we've just got a simple kind of rhythmic pattern here of now A's. We had E's, which was still in the scale, but it was the 5th note of the scale. Let's go on the root and let's have a listen. I'll try it lower like that. So that sits nicely. So what we could do here, so thinking about today is an interesting exercise, right? Because today we kind of put harmony in the spotlight and we started with our chords and chord progression and we didn't think too much about rhythm and drums or the bass line. So here I'm coming at it the other way around. I'm now sort of saying, okay, I've got my chords, let's have a bass with those chords for a second. And by playing the A in that simple pattern that's going on there, just A with a bit of a rhythm to it, what we're kind of doing actually is something that I showed a little earlier, and that is we're creating a pedal tone for our chords, because instead of doing it actually in the chords, that is like having an A here and going like this in the actual chord progression, the bass is kind of doing that. So it's going together quite nicely as a kind of pedal tone bass, enhancing again what's going on up here in the chords. So that's kind of a way where sometimes you don't use the pedal tone in the chords, it's actually going on in the bass. If you just write the bass, it's all playing, let's say the root note, like it is A, and the root note of this chord progression is A, it's doing that job, and that's really helping to glue everything together nicely. So let's have a listen as we work through the different clips. So this is still the muted chord progression, so the very basic. It's kind of hard to juggle the views away, so let's try and spin it up there a little bit. So I hope you can hear this chord progression can really start morphing now into all these beautiful things. You know, we wrote a nice chord progression on the piano, we smoothed it all out, we can now make it plucky and rhythmical like this, or we can go back to a nice sustained chord progression. So we could switch instruments with it, or we could modulate like the envelope like I'm doing. So we've got a plucky synth or a sustain one. If we go back to the chords like this, we want again sustain here for this progression. So maybe what I would do is move my chord progression to more than one instrument. If you like, I can give you an example of what I'm speaking about here. So this would be the sort of pad chord, let's say, of the chord progression. And then if we make a new MIDI clip over here and I copy the same chord progression across, that's been rhythmically cut up. It's the same chords. Let's give that, for context, an analog. Try that again. And I want to pitch that up a little bit as well. So we'd need to take that up probably a bit of an octave. And then work on this analog a little bit as well. So I can now incorporate kind of the two synths together. So it's the same chord progression, but one now plays this plucky kind of analog melody up an octave. That's also what happened there. That needs to be up there. And then we've got over here our chords like sustained and kind of drony, pad drone sort of style. So you could start, as you can see, just looking at this, we can start running pretty quickly into a full track just from those chords. And includes, as I said, the bass is playing a role here. The bass is just nice and simple here. We're sort of, that's what we want in this case. The chords are doing a lot of the work and the instruments we choose to play them. And so this nice simple bass that just stays on the A like that, it doesn't need any crazy melody in it or anything too much, is a really nice supporting then bass for what goes on in all the stuff that we've built up so far. And if we looked at some other options, you know, just here's another bass over here. Again, it's just an A, but a simple, another different rhythm. So that could work as well. Maybe needs a note in here. Yeah, it needs a little, yeah, okay. So just an alternative kind of rhythm going on over there. But it's just, again, the same bass instrument with a nice simple root note bass playing, nothing fancy here. So if you went crazy with the bass here with a big melody or something, it's not going to really be the best complement to what we've done so far, because today we started with the harmony and said, okay, we've got a nice chord progression on the piano, now let's turn it into a chord progression with the synth and let's evolve it. So hopefully this has been helpful and you've seen all these little building blocks and steps and how we've evolved the chord progression. Now let's sort of look at some other options that we have here. So let's say we stop a little bit the progressive vibes for a second. As much as I love all that, that's great. Lots of emotion in all of that music, and that's a good thing. But let's say we're maybe working on a house track or minimal or something like that, and we don't kind of want as much as a full-blown chord progression like that, a four chord progression, which is what we had here. You know, when we started here, we chose our 4 chords and then we developed it into a progression. So let's say we're over with a new MIDI track and we're thinking about, okay, we want some sort of stabs and we want like just some chords in our track, but we don't want, as I said, a full-blown chord progression that we're going to do all the good stuff we were just looking at. So what we're going to be talking about here It's something that's sometimes called vamping, and it's a lot in sort of house and techno, where you've just got, like, as I said, rather than a big flowing four chord progression or 3 chords or something, you're just vamping, you're just playing on a couple of chords. Could be 2 chords only. It can be the same chord even with some different voicings. So all these voicings are going to be really helpful for us. And let's look at that then. So house groove, new MIDI clip. And let's say over here, we are going to be, I don't know, A minor is good. As I said, it's kind of easy to follow, I think, for the fact it's a white note scale. So we're going to build a chord. And again, we could have the chord 1 just for the starting point, and let's make it a 7th chord straight off the bat. So we're going to have all 4 notes in play, and then let's kind of have that chord again somewhere over here, but let's actually maybe make this a little bit bigger perhaps. So let's go 2 bars. And we'll maybe extend these chords out a bit. And we do need a synth of some sort on there. So let's see. Again, I do like making my sounds from scratch, but I did save some things that we could use. I would have thought. Maybe we'll try. Most of those are a bit too fancy. They got too much processing and stuff on them. Okay, let's see what this sounds like. Again, I think it could be just as easier with more a rawer sound for now. We'll worry about that later. Let's say operator. Yeah, keep it like that. Kind of housey. Right, and let's say we loop it up tight for the moment. So we're going for something like this. We've just got a nice kind of couple of house chords, right? And so currently these chords are identical to each other, right? They're 2 7th chords, nothing different to them. But we know already, since we started today, that we could re-voice this chord. So we've got lots of common tones all over the place, so that's not really an issue. But we could turn this maybe into a major chord here by moving the 3rd. Could be interesting. Or we could re-voice it by going down to the sus chord. Or we could go up to the sus4. Right, so you kind of like here we've just got 2 chords, not even 2 different chords, 2 of the same chords. It's setting us a challenge to kind of re-voice the 2nd chord a little bit differently, right? So if we keep it the same, I think this is kind of a nice little exercise to do. And if you re-voice it, so we use an inversion, now I've put the G at the bottom and we're sort of falling down into here. And what we could do here is kind of have another one of these, I think, as well. But a lot shorter than this. So again, now we could sort of look at re-voicing this again. We've got common notes, but we also know this ties around from the last chord to the first chord. We're looking for little ways to sort of spice these up a little bit, right? So maybe sus. So that can be a nice little practice, a bit of homework for those of you in the stream here, if you're watching in replay or you're watching in real time, is just to sort of set yourself actually a couple of chords and then the same chords, and then look at this. You're working in one octave. We're just in one octave, and we're working on using inversions. We're working on changing our chord quality and type from sus to major to minor. We could bring diminished in here. We could also use extensions. So once again, let's duplicate this loop over to here. And then in the second section here, let's say we go back to everything the same, which is a good starting point. So we've got something like that. So we could actually, we've got the sevenths here. So again, maybe we could use an extension. So that would be the ninth on that chord right up there. And maybe we could go on this one to the 11th on the extension up there. So same chord, revoiced with extensions, 9th, 11th, and the 7th chord here. And then maybe we take that 11th and we invert it. So we get back closer to our chord shape. We're using the 11th interval, but we're bringing everything together into the same sort of space. Similarly with this chord. So let's make again our synth sound a little bit more interesting. Okay, pop over to the effects, looking at the wrong screen there for a second. Overdrive, don't really like how that was sounding. Maybe a bit of raw. Or actually, I know what, we'll use a bit of saturator. Okay, just checking in on the chat here. Lenny, how do I make a basic melody? I'm a pure noob. I have heaps of trouble in creativity. Well, Lenny, thank you, of course, for dropping a comment there. This is a little series I'm doing at the moment, and today is harmony. So we've sort of been looking at chords, and it's part 3. Part 1 and 2 were rhythm and bass, beginner friendly, so that would obviously suit you quite well. Next week is going to be the melody tutorial, so it'll be a similar deep dive for 2 hours, beginner friendly, focusing in on melody, because we're sort of using the way that the building blocks can kind of go together quite nicely, which is kind of learning rhythm and drums and rhythm, and then sort of combining that with the bass, and then combining it with harmony. So if you're up for it, come join me next Sunday, 3 p.m. Central Eastern Time, for a melody deep dive where we're gonna go through all the basics of that. So I hope that helps. Yeah, leave that off for now. Don't really need it. Just was thinking to make them a little bit dirty, but I'd need to work on that a little bit, and that's not really what we're about here today. We're trying to more get our sound going here a little bit, just for context. So no problem, Lenny, you're very welcome. So these chords here, as I said, are all built around just one chord. That we've revoiced different ways to get it into an interesting sequence of chords that is all built from this one chord here. We've not used another chord from the scale. We've used the same chord, but we've used inversions and extensions such as 13ths, 9ths, and inversions to get it to be interesting. And that again gives me all sorts of variations where I could copy this down and maybe in some of my track they all come together like that, so it's nice and slow, and then I kind of speed up the rhythm. Play around with the synth sound, etc. So a lot of house and techno, as I said, 2 chords, and I think it's a great exercise to practice and mess around with, is trying to make a sequence of chords of 2 chords only. And I must say, by the way, in 12.2, the new update, when that arrives, there's this beautiful device called Expressive Chords. You're going to have lots of fun with that because you can just load it onto tracks, and it's essentially just about what you hear is what you use when it comes to the chords that it produces. Rather than needing to have a background in theory, you can just go in and play chords with it, all different nice chord shapes, record it, and you use your ear. It's all about how good it sounds rather than needing to sort of dive into too much theory. That's coming in 12.2. I did a whole video on my channel. If you're interested in what that sounds like, how it works, there's a 15-minute video on my channel about the expressive chord device that's coming, right? So maybe we'll just look at a couple of quick things there then, if we're building chords inside of Ableton. Because as I said, for me personally, there's all these plugins like Scalar, and I've worked with artists who use things like that. And I've just generally found that people get in more trouble with those than they're actually helpful, because they spit out all of these great chords and chord progressions and things, but they don't necessarily sound great out the box. And they don't necessarily mean that you then understand how to make the right bass line that goes with that, or the right melody that goes with that, or the arpeggio, etc. And they can end up running you into a lot more trouble than they're worth. So I do plan to do a video on an AI platform that does chords, which actually I think is quite decent as a competitor for Scalar. It's AI and it just spits out chords, and then we could throw that into here and again twist it and turn it around into something cool and good sounding if you'd like to see that. That's an idea that I had to do. Right, so let's say we've done a bit of a 2 chord, well, not even 2 chords, just 1 chord. And then we've twisted it by inversions and voicing to get it to be something that stands on its own. And with a bit of automation and stuff, you know, this could be, with the right synth again, could sound really, really interesting in terms of, you know, just that 1 chord. So 2 chords could be like, again, you know, popping into there and picking a key in a scale, or not even worrying about that, you know, just saying like what we learned today. So if we turned off the scale for a moment and we were just looking at our keyboard, we could be just going minor chord. Right, that's a minor chord right there, and then we are going on top of it here, so that's C minor. So we could be picking that as a chord, and that would be chord 1. And then we duplicate it across a bit. And over here we go, well, what about not a minor chord, but a diminished chord? I think that could sound maybe more interesting, whoops, as a kind of later. So here, maybe we have a sus chord. Went a bit wild there. Let's try sus4. And we could even throw in another chord we haven't used. This one. It's an augmented chord, right? But all I'm doing there again is just playing around with different chords. They all have the same root note at this point in time, which could also be different, but I'm just trying different chord shapes out here as another way again to have like a chord progression or some chords in my track before worrying about revoicing and all the things that we looked at earlier on today. This is just kind of building chords out of the different chord qualities, listening to how they sound together and the feeling I'm looking for between them. So it's a little bit tense, but I kind of like it because it's kind of deliberate. That there's that diminished chord in there and there's a sus2 chord, giving it a little bit of tension. It's a little bit wonky. Change our drums here. And let's say we are more in C with these chords. You know, so we could take those kind of chords, excuse me, and twist them up a bit and take them into a new direction of a genre here. And so this is just built around messing about with different chord types. And again, just experimenting with all of that rather than sort of getting too technical with a scale and a key like we did earlier. We're just kind of messing around with a minor chord and an augmented here and a sus over here and a diminished to come up with something kind of a little bit interesting, a little bit unique. Okay, I'm sound designing things out a bit here, but it's the chords. That's kind of giving me that kind of weird and wonkiness, right? And sort of something kind of fun and interesting there. So I think there's some good homework exercises in here if you want to play around with that. As I said, that are really going to teach you quite a lot about how you can actually make interesting movements and harmony between the same chord by revoicing it and transforming it in inversions and revoicing, and then just a couple of chords. So again, instead of like what we've looked at earlier, which is building a beautiful chord progression and revoicing it and all that good stuff that we've looked at the start of today's video. If you missed that, do go back and watch from the beginning. We've done lots of that. We're now sort of digging into, yeah, some different ways to look at it that could be great depending on the music you're writing, house or techno or something, and you're not after that big emotional quality that you get with a progressive chord progression, like where we were back over here. So let's do another one just while we're working towards the end of today's stream. You know, as always, I hope you've been enjoying that. Lauren, great to see you, my friend. It's been a while. I'll resume this excellent video in the week, but the title I see from it is very promising, Heath. It's a great pedagogue. Well, thank you very much. And I hope you're very well. It's great to see you. So let's do a couple of other chord progressions here. So I've written some down for some different genres here: house, melodic, progressive, techno. So let's say we do that techno progression there. So we're going to pop in a MIDI clip, and these are going to be pretty quickly done. So let's say we drop our wavetable there. We're going away from that sort of twisted sound that we just had. Well, actually, we can leave it. We can just tweak that in a second. All right, so change my mind, do that sometimes, apologies. All right, so here we are. Let's say we want to have, let's actually bring this clip over as well so I can just kind of see it up there. Stretch my track out a bit. Bring that up under there. So I didn't go into earlier Roman numerals, but hopefully you can see that on the screen there. So I've got this kind of techno chord progression, and what Roman numerals tell us is whether it's a minor or a major chord. So this chord progression that says techno, it's basically moving. So let's see if we can do it down here. Let's again just pick a root note, so we can say A minor. So we're going to pop in an A. That's going to be a root note right there. Okay, it's I in lowercase as the very first chord. I lowercase means it's a minor chord. So I'm going to be 3 semitone interval to make that minor. And then on top of that, 1, 2, 3, 4, that is going to be chord 1. It's little I. So Roman numerals, small letters means minor, capitals is major. So we've got I, which is chord 1 in minor as the root. Okay, I is also the first chord, chord 1, minor, chord 1. Chord 2 is a 7th chord and it's major. So if we go over to here, let's say we do it here, and we need to come up to chord 7. So let's sort of stretch this out. I'm going to need to go backwards and forwards a little bit. So let's say again, we go into A minor up here if you like, so you can follow this along a little bit better. It doesn't need to be, we don't need to be blind. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, it's the G. So it's going to be the start. It was a major chord, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So it would be like that. Okay, then we are looking at a 6th chord that's major. So if we kind of stretch out our clip a little bit. Okay, so the next chord we're going to be putting in is the 6th. The 6th note of the scale is going to be the F. So we can come across there, and then we're looking up here and we see it's a major as well. So again, the critical thing, 1, 2, 3, 4 is that interval there. That determines that we've got another major chord, and then we go back to the 7th. That makes life a little bit easier. So we're transcribing that over to there, let's say at the minimum. So let's select all of those, make them legato like that. Voicing doesn't look great. It looks like we need to revoice them, but let's just hear what that progression sounds like. Switch off some stuff. Okay, so this is still pretty weird from before. So we've got our techno progression, following those Roman numerals and transcribing them there. So what we did was pick A minor as the key and scale, and then we transcribed the Roman numerals to represent a minor chord. Again, you must kind of get the, you know, it'll help you so much when you go back, if you watch the start of this video, chord types. I know that's minor, that interval tells me that. This is major, that tells me that, that tells me that, that tells me that, all the time. Let's revoice this. So we're going to be kind of using inversions to get these much more closer together in movement. We don't have any common, you know, we're jumping all over the place a bit here. So let's take these top 2 notes and bring them down. We still don't have common tones there at all. As I said, I'm moving a bit quickly just to get this one done a little bit here. Similarly with that, even with the inversions. we don't really have common tones too much here at all. So let's see how this sounds with a bit of an inversion like that. So maybe what we're doing, all of these are the same chord types, but now we've sort of stepped it down with a voicing that's leading the progression along and down. They're all still the same chords. I've just used inversions. The next issue we've got a little bit is we've got lots of work to do in this one with getting common tones, because there aren't really common tones right across the board, right? So there's going to be lots in this particular chord progression of sort of like, you know, deciding where we're splitting things. So let's again see about bringing the third across like this to make a new chord here. That means the common tone is in the middle of this chord, and it's now in this middle of this very end little chord. And then we could do that maybe here as well, stretching that one across like so. This is kind of how I do it. And I'm trying all the thirds to start with, so the middle notes. So already starting again to make a bit of sense here. And if we were to slice these up into little notes, we're going to get little melodies that are going to pop up in here. Just doing that with the pencil tool in Ableton 12. That up a little bit. So starting to take that chord progression and turn it into something a little more interesting. Maybe we also change the grid in the background here. We do a little bit more splitting, just for some more rhythm changes. Yeah, just getting creative there now, but that will be something for the harmonic and melodic rhythm in the future. Today we were sort of going vertical with our chords and chord progressions. So I'm just going to undo that a bit. I was going well and truly just getting into my own space there and going for it. But that was just a quick transcribe of this techno progression that I'd written here. So we did it from scratch. We just put the clip over and we went, okay, Roman numerals, I, V11, V1, V11. What does that tell us? It tells us the chord qualities. We can pick a key and a scale, transcribe that out, and then we've got our nice techno chord progression or starting of it. Then we've revoiced it using inversions. We've kept the chord shapes. They're still minor and major. And now we've started to develop common tones. So we're made a new little chord. So this line changes from one chord to another. So this is also a really great thing because we're finding motives, what's called motives in here. I spoke about that earlier as well. So if you start to pull this apart a bit, there is a melody within the chord progression now. And these are gold because this means that, as I said, the chord progression has more to it than just the chords themselves. There's a melody tucked in there, so more interesting sounding. Because there's this little melody that's going on inside all of that. And those little motives, when you start finding those, they can then be reused in other parts of your track. But it's meaning our chords now kind of have a melody tucked inside of them. So on that note, I'm going to sort of wrap things up a bit, as always, with this little series of electronic music theory for electronic producers. It's been a journey. We've done rhythm, we've done basses, we're now doing harmony today, which was to sort of show you how to the different chord qualities and types, and then making chord progressions or just messing around with a couple of chords. So I hope you found that super interesting. As always, I can feel there's a part 2, 3, 4, 5 that could easily happen, but step by step. Next week, we're going to do melody. So that'll be good as well to dive into that and look at, you know, again, beginner-friendly melody, building on top of this, all these layers of the series, and then eventually we'll get into harmonic and melodic rhythm. So one quick thing I did want to mention, as some of you may or may not be aware, if you're enjoying the content on this channel, I do actually write a newsletter every 2 weeks in the month. So it's a bi-weekly newsletter. It's all for electronic producers, artists, DJs, lots of stories. I dive into how Bicep make their music. Again, I've just done a whole series there about copy, transform, and sampling. There's lots of examples, tips, tricks, all that good sort of stuff. If you want to subscribe to that, it's a free newsletter. There's no funny business or anything like that. There's a link below in the video description. It'd be great to have you in the community there, because I'm also doing things in there where I'm starting to set little challenges for the subscribers of the newsletter, that you can go and do the homework and then share with me what you've done, and then I'll put that into the newsletter as a little community section where we can turn the spotlight on what you guys and girls are doing. So check that out in the description, as I'm sure some of you who follow the content here didn't realize that. You can also read the newsletter before you subscribe. There are lots of, you know, already previous weeks there that you can click on and check out, have a read, and see if it's something you want to be involved in. As always, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. If you've been here and enjoyed the video, it's been great to have you. Those of you with me and enjoy this, if you're watching back on repeat, have a safe and happy Easter to everybody, to you, your family, and your friends. And I will catch you in the next stream of this series, all about melody, beginner friendly, and we'll just keep on going there with the knowledge and keep on sharing it. So take care, everybody. Keep on creating. Alex, thanks for being with me all the way there. Lenny, see you in the melody stream. Lauren, great to see you here. And to everybody else, take care, and catch you in the next one. Till the next time. See you later, everybody. Cheerio.